all of our world objects. Just for testing, we grab the first room because we know that we added a room to this world. Just give us the first one. And then we grab our player Gary, who we also happen to know exists. We add an inventory item to Gary, and then we set his state as disabled. So just here, just going over the last 6 weeks, you're seeing the factory pattern, you're seeing the strategy pattern, you're seeing the state pattern, you're seeing, and pretty soon you're going to see the command pattern. Do the same thing for Beth. Grab Beth out. And then we have as part of our game engine, we have the ability to render. And so we got to say, hey, take this room and just draw it on the screen. So right now you see nothing. If I draw the room, then I can see, okay, we're in a test chamber. The test chamber has a description. We've got some targets, which are monsters. In this case, Carl is a zombie. We don't know that yet. And then also here are Gary and Beth. So those are our players. And this is kind of our little test area. In the coming weeks, oh, I'm sorry, and we just drew the status bar for Gary. We're assuming that we're Gary. So Gary has 140 health, and we haven't implemented stamina yet. So, pretty soon we're going to want to write a command parser so that we can actually sit at the console and interact with our world. We aren't quite there yet, but when that happens, all this will get cleaned up, and all you really see is render room or draw room, and then draw status bar, and then read key. Hey, that your fan. Carl's still here? Carl is still here. I think the idea is that we want to just learn to hate Carl so much that when we actually start to play the game, when we fight Carl because he's a zombie, we're happy to see him go. Alright, so for our hive mind execute, the first thing we do is that we pass in a game request using our command pattern that says heal. The request is coming from Gary, and he's targeting Beth. Then we display that command using, or we display the response using our command pattern. So we say Gary heals Beth for 5 damage. Then for whatever reason, Gary decides he wants to fight Beth. So the game action is fight, the sender is Gary, and the target is Beth. And we use this to look at our state pattern. What we did was we said that you can't fight if you're disabled. So up here we set Gary's state to disabled. So if I request that Gary fight Beth and I display the response, just get Gary struggles to move because Gary's disabled. And then in response, we said, hey, while Gary's hit points are greater than 0, let's have Beth this time fight Gary, and we'll display the response. So we've got Beth attacks for 21, and so on and so forth until Gary dies. So we got a bug here where our health isn't being updated. But we do know that Gary's dead. So the bug is that after Beth does her attacks, we don't get an immediate update for health, and we don't see a death message. So those are some of the places where when we start looking at the really nitty-gritty part of our game, we're going to have a lot of fun and spend a lot of time probably going through testing, doing end-to-end stuff, and getting the game to a really good playable state. So that's the game so far. This week is the 6th week and the 6th pattern. So we have to decide if moving forward we want to do more patterns or take what we have and just really dive in and get things going. I'm kind of voting for really diving in and getting things going, but we'll see. Okay, so that's where we are. And right now, the pain point that the flyweight pattern can really help with is while we have a central list of game objects, and so again, as we're building up this world, as it's being or well architected, hopefully, we can look at these things and say, well, if every pattern requires a abstraction, if every pattern requires these concrete implementations, we have all of that now. So implementing these patterns actually becomes easier and easier, because typically what we already have is only missing one or two things, and then that would allow us to benefit from the power of the pattern. The waiting eyes ask, so this is a linear kind of program. Right now, yes. One of the things we have to decide is in some of the. I'll come back over to GitHub for a second. Is that after this week, we got some advanced patterns, we got some more in-depth patterns, and so what would make this game not linear is if we opened it up to multiple players and we had to handle events and concurrency. And so people could walk into the room, we have to process the state of the game continuously, so that kind of a pub sub method, so that when somebody walks into your room, it triggers your screen to redraw. So there's some really fun places to extend this. The question right now is how to move forward in terms of not necessarily architecture and design, but more product management, right? So this is it's more than just a phase, but during this phase of development, we're working in a silo. And I think with every application, you have to decide, okay, when do we stop working in a silo and create that portal out to a user environment? And we're close. But I think we should all pat ourselves in the back after 6 weeks and without using anything more than the design patterns we've covered, we've built quite a lot. Okay, so one of the things that is in the flyweight pattern that we're missing is a way to identify a game object. We just don't have it. So if we go into iGameObject, I mean, this is why creating that lowest common denominator is so important, because everything in our world derives from iGameObject. We can add here the things that we want everything in our world to have. So I want everything in the world to have a game object key. The system not good for that. Okay, so I have added a new property to the base game object, which means when I hit Control-Shift-B to build, I'm going to get some errors. And if you've been here for the other refactorings, this is just the rabbit hole of errors. Alright, so in our base game object, we need to satisfy the contract. Public GUID. Game object key. Oh, wait, hang on. Yes. Say what? That is weird. I think my IntelliSense took a second to catch up. Great. Anyhow. Oh. Yeah, we're fine. Fat fingered the K and key. Okay, not going crazy. If we build again, we're just going to track these guys down. And by this, we can kind of see how our inheritance works. So our inventory items, like in the program we saw that we added, we gave Gary a charm we added to his inventory. We use the builder pattern for that, so that player inventory items are different from other inventory items. But inside the base, we want to make sure that this is a game object key as well. Okay. So, by doing that in two places, everything in the game now has a game object key, which is really cool. The only issue with that is we haven't given the things in the game a way to set them or create them. So anywhere we have a factory, we want to also instantiate a new game object key. So instead of our player factory, we're newing up players. And this is a great point about the factory. I don't know, it sounds very arrogant to say this is a great point. This is a point about the factory, which is we could put that new GUID inside of the player constructor, but there's going to be times when we want to be able to create a player and not assign the GUID. So we decide that GUID creation is part of the factory, not necessarily a part of the player creation itself. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of a way that... no, I can't. No examples are coming to mind. But game object key is equal to GUID. Easy there. New GUID. Okay. This wants me to use the object initializer. I'm going to refrain. But so now, any player that's made with our factory is going to get that GUID. Okay. And we also have an NPC factory, which is actually pretty straightforward. And we do this, we did our best to make everything a little bit differently. So there wasn't the need to go quite as deep into this factory, so it's pretty easy. Game object key is equal to GUID dot new GUID. So we'll do that for all these. Now there's simplify this a little bit by saying GUID game object key is equal to GUID dot new GUID. Make that a var, since I think it's pretty clear from the right-hand operator what that means. And we'll just pass that in there. Okay. So it takes care of NPCs. And we only care about the factories right now. We go to the monster factory. We only got one monster. That makes it pretty easy. Now let's close this. Come back. Close a lot of things. Let's steal this guy. And we'll do the same thing in our monster factory.